Teatime, yeah, making a difference, one cup at a time. Yeah, this is Teatime, yeah, making a difference, one cup at a time. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Teatime, making a difference, one cup at a time. Teatime, yeah. Teatime, time.
Well, good morning and welcome to Tea Time with Miss Liz. That's right, we are here and we are on the last week of April already, and we're going into May. The time has just flown really by fast. This morning, I have an incredible guest sitting in the back in the studio, so I want to get right into it. So, we're going to jump into the disclaimer, we're going to do a quick little bio, and then we're going to bring in Frances Altman. That's right, she's going to be talking about her book that she wrote called Destiny's Daughter on Mary Edwards Walker. If no one knows about Mary Edwards Walker, you will know a little bit about her tonight, this morning, this afternoon, and this evening, wherever you may be tuning in, a little bit on her. And you're going to really be blown away by what you're going to hear today on today's show. So we're going to do the disclaimer, and then we're going to get into the incredible guest that's sitting backstage because she's super excited, and I'm super excited. I'm all giddy this morning. So the disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz myself is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith. However, may bring forward dialogue and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment in taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussion for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is significant to know that the show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in today's show in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you decide that the show is not made for you at this time, I myself respect your wishes and will see you at a later show at a later date and time. And again, all Tea Time shows are done on Thursday this year in 2023, unless it's a rescheduled Tea Time. So now a little bit about the guest who is going to pop in about 2 seconds, and she's going to share some incredible information on Mary Edwards Walker. Frances Altman has enjoyed a long career in the communications by blending public relations, marketing, and freelance writing. Now retired, she began writing children's stories as a stay-at-home mother, then worked for Fields Enterprise community newspaper and the Chicago Sun-Times, National Hot Dog and Sausage Council, Allied Single, and Virginia Commonwealth University, where she also taught. She has written several hundred newspapers and magazines articles on food and community business and children's stores for Child Life Highlights, Weekly Reader, and published 9 books for young readers, including Something Egg, Reggie the Goat, Spirit Dog, Minister, Umbrella Man, and escape to freedom. She's earned a master's degree from Rosenberg, Rosenwald University, Chicago. I know I didn't say that right. Her 10th book, Destiny's Daughter, is a bonus to a long career. It highlights the life of Mary Edwards Walker, suffragist, a Civil War doctor, and an advocate for women's health and education during an opposed time. And for more on Frances's bio, you can check out Miss Liz's Facebook page, LinkedIn, and all of that good stuff. So let me get Frances in here and let me sip on some tea because my tongue is twisting right now. Welcome, Frances.
Well, good morning there, Miss Liz.
Good morning. So I'm gonna get you to say a few words while I sip on some tea here. So do you want to share a little bit on who Frances Altman is and how she got into writing?
Well, I'm just an ordinary lady, really, that started writing things when I was in high school, and my intent was to become a court reporter when I graduated from high school. But every place that I kept working kept asking me to donate to the newsletter or to the magazine, and so I just drifted into writing, and then I began going to college, different colleges, in fact, wherever my husband and I, wherever his job would take him. And I started writing and began luckily selling a few things here and there, and that encouraged me to keep going. So that's sort of the nutshell, you might say, of how I got here. Always working with, can't say that you've done this by yourself. You always have to say you had friends that helped you along the way or encouraged you. And that's exactly what's happened.
So, Frances, how old were you when you started writing?
Probably about, well, as a child, I entered a few contests, but really started to actually sell something. I was about 21. And so, of course, now I'm heading into the mid 80s, and I'm still writing. But there are a lot of other ladies I know who are older than I, and they're writing. And it's really just being persistent and writing whatever you enjoy writing about.
So, what do you really like writing?
Well, that's a good question. I keep jumping around to different genres. I tend in the longer material to go into a historical fiction. That's but this one, of course, is following a real person and using a real historical information, which was along many years jumping around and accidentally finding things that kept me going on this topic. But for the most part, I enjoy doing a short newspaper article, magazine article, just as much as doing something longer.
So, let's get into who is Dr. Mary Edwards Walker?
Well, she was grew up as a a young child, really a teenager in Oswego, New York, and wanted to be a doctor. And girls, of course, weren't allowed to become a doctor, but she managed to get into a medical school and went on from there. Of course, she couldn't when she went back home and said, "I want to join your practice." The other doctors in her hometown said, "No, no, no." So she took up nursing and being a doctor on her own by going to Washington, D.C. at the beginning of the Civil War when they were bringing wounded back into what they called the Indiana Hospital there in Washington. And she was there for a couple of years, continuing to support herself, and finally managed to convince a uh, General Burnside, that she could go out into the field and help him. He agreed. By that time, the Civil War was in need of a great many doctors and nurses, but she of course learned amputation. And you have to remember that in those days, when you went to medical school, that was only about 13 weeks. Would you believe, to become a doctor? So she had to learn a lot of things right on the spot, and continued on after the war. She became a suffragist. And somewhat, when I read about her and read her own book, which I'm holding up here, she actually wrote her memoirs, sort of an essay of women's rights. And she encouraged women at that time to get out and come out of the shadows of their husbands, take on a career of their own, learn to listen, learn to converse with people, just as she did with generals and kings and so forth. And from all of that, I decided that this was more of a woman's interest book than it was middle grade, as I had been writing before. So it sort of inspired me to keep going, and particularly during COVID, when you're shut up there. So I kept reading and writing, and this is what happened. Practically a miracle then that Apprentice House Press, which is a student-run press, the only one in the United States, accepted my book, and here we are.
Wow. She sounds like a woman, a real role model for strong, independent women.
Yes, I found that's what I found encouraging about her story. There are other history books about her, some very good in-depth ones, but I wanted to bring out her personality a little bit more.
So what did you learn about her personality?
Well, she was pretty spunky, and but one thing that she did listen. She listened, and I find that conversation sometimes seems to fade away because women maybe particularly become spontaneous, and you reply back too quickly. You don't listen first and sort of gather up what your thoughts are or what they should be, and then respond. So that was one of the things that I sort of gained from her book. Also, perseverance. During COVID, persevering was really one of the main things I think that everyone had to go through. So there again, a couple of lessons I've learned there myself along the way.
Well, and she also received an award, correct?
Yes, she did, and that's an interesting because she was actively accepted into the army for probably only a few short years, 2 or 3, and but her real on the field battlefield experience came in her earlier years there, where she was out operating and so forth, right in the Fredericksburg, Virginia area. Then, after the war was over, she went of course, to Washington, D.C. and settled there. She decided that she had not been paid enough, that her pension was not as much as some men soldiers or veterans were making. So she challenged President Andrew Johnson. And in those days, you could walk right into the president's office, I guess. Anyway, she became somewhat of a pest. And she kept wanting her pension. And he said to his Secretary of State, please help me get rid of this woman, she's bugging me. And so they appeased her by giving her this medal. And as it turned out, it was the Medal of Honor. At that time, they were giving away about 1,000 medals of honor. And they just began giving them out helter-skelter to anyone that sort of somewhat qualified. So actually, even though she is cited for her duties during the Civil War, by modern terminology, she probably would not qualify. But it was rescinded a couple of times. She ended up with 2 medals, but she kept wearing her medal and using it as somewhat of what I call a public relations type medal, because it brought attention to her, and then she could talk about the suffrage cause. So anyway, after she was about 100 years gone, when Jimmy Carter came into the presidency, he was somewhat besieged by women's organizations that had been rallying for about 10, 15 years to reinstate the Medal of Honor. So that's what happened. She received it from him and is the only woman to date that has received it.
Oh, well, that's really interesting that she's the only woman.
Yes, and surprisingly, she's somewhat come back out of the shadows again, because the U.S. Army is renaming Fort A.P. Hill in Bowling Green, Virginia, the Mary Walker Fort, And also in 2024, the beginning of next year, a quarter will bear her portrait, and we can all afford to get a quarter with her picture on it.
Well, that's cool that they're doing that.
And at the same time, they're doing the coin business to numerous other women who have come out of the shadows of history and doing a whole series of quarters on women.
Oh, well, that's good. I like that. I'm all about empowering women because we need that, right?
Right. Well, we have to keep urging others to pick up the paces.
Right? We got to keep those stories going because we need that legacy of strong, independent women out there. So again, Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, she also did advocacy for women's health and education. So what did you learn about that with writing the book?
Well, I found that she did. That's why I somewhat called her a maverick, because she took on these other topics that she felt women should be more involved in. It wasn't just, she could almost foresee that they were not going to give women the vote at that time. And so her lectures, whether she was giving her lectures in Washington, D.C. or in London, where she did travel, she kept telling them the same thing, to stand up for yourself. And also, interestingly enough, I even read this in 17 magazine, and one of the things that she promoted was wearing comfortable clothes. If you're going to go out and rally, wear sturdy shoes. And sometimes, even today, I look at the ladies that are rallying in different locations, and they're not wearing sturdy shoes, and they're not really dressed for the occasion. So that's another point that I try to make in my book, that the ladies, dress for the occasion.
So what really got you interested in Dr. Mary?
Huh. Well, I guess you might say, well, back at that time, as I was writing from home, I had written 4 books about men, bios about men for the middle grade students. They were for a men's series, and I thought that he should add a woman's series. The publisher, T.S. Denison. Well, I started my research. I sold an article about Walker, and by the time I got back to my editor, the company had folded. Oh. So she went. The whole manuscript went into into your box, your savings box, and I went on in another direction in marketing for the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council.
Oh wow!
Transferring from actually writing for newspapers into a more marketing position.
Well, let's get into those newspapers that you wrote for. You wrote for Chicago Sun-Times, National Hot Dog and Sausage Council. Tell us a little bit about those newspapers.
Well, the Hot Dog Council was about 15 years of going back and forth across the country, promoting processed meat products for the meat industries of people, talking to home economists, talking to meat processors, all of the major processors, on how they might better improve their products and also present their products to the public. Sometimes processed meat products were not really getting a good story told about them. So anyway, that's what I was doing, was trying to present better presentation about processed meats. And would you believe that the very first day that I was on the job with the Hot Dog Council, a man called me up and asked me that they were doing a campaign on what was called red dye number 2 in the casing that hot dogs were made in.
Oh.
And he said, he went on, and I was stumbling around, probably like I am right now, stumbling around trying to explain something I did not know. And I said, who are you? And he said, I am Ralph Nader. And I was like, I said, well, everybody loves hot dogs, and thank you for calling. I just couldn't respond, because he, of course, had a great deal of background, and I knew nothing about processed meats.
But
So anyway,
I'm sure with all your writing, Francis, you learned a lot along the way.
yes, really, to try and double check nearly everything that you write, to be confident that it is correct and mostly correct. I try and check everything with a couple of, particularly on this book, check everything with a couple of supporting materials, and you know, really present a good presentation if it's possible.
So tell us a little bit about Chicago Sun-Times. How long were you there?
Well, the Sun Times owns Field Enterprises. At the
Oh,
time, did so. I was sort of working my way up from starting out doing some editing for them. Pick it up, take it home, edit it, and bring it back. And one day they said, "Gee, the woman's editor, which they had women's editors in those days, that were before they printed the woman's page." And that was bridal information and club information and rewriting a lot of stuff. And they said, we'd like to offer you this job. And I took it because my children then were up, starting into school. And, you know, they let me adjust my time very graciously. And I worked my way up through a couple of their suburban newspapers. And then eventually with one of their supplements that was with the Sun Times.
so
So,
Francis, could you tell us a little about freelance writing?
yes, freelance writing is where you write what you want to write or find a topic that's newsworthy, and then you sort of send inquiries to different magazines, different newspapers, and so forth, asking them if they would be interested in your story. Then, if they okay it, you go ahead and finish it up. It's really a very difficult business because because you have to go through these different stages. Many times, once you have become acquainted with an editor, they will assign you a topic, and that's what's best, what works best. If you can become friendly with, starting with community newspapers is a good place to start.
So, if anybody wanted to get into writing, Francis, what 3 tips would you give them?
Well, be sure that it's properly written with good spelling, and an interesting beginning, and you feel that it would interest people. Then, of course, be you have to go ahead and research the publication that it fits with, and then just be patient because so many people feel that just start it, you can just sail in there. Well, it takes a long time and a lot of relationships. I also suggest that anyone interested in writing become affiliated with writing groups. I belong to the Maryland Writers. There's things like the National Federation of Press Women, National Pen Women, and those organizations that have monthly workshops and will help you uh, gain confidence. And of course, anytime that the colleges offer different types of, if you're not working particularly on a certain degree, most colleges have communications type programs, how to be a journalist, journalism 101, things like that. I think that you do have to get some type of formal instruction from someplace so that you know how to prepare your material to present it to an editor.
So, we have a question here for you, Francis. They want to know about the Child Life Highlights and the Weekly Reader.
Well, those are two children's publications that I think one of them highlights is still available. Uh, and you write your story and you submit it. Of course, now you can now do that electronically. And if you'll go to that magazine, they usually tell how you can submit your piece, and you have to do this follow up. And usually, you just send a part of your information, and they'll say, "Yes, we want this topic." No, it doesn't. It doesn't fit. And many other publications like that are places that you can begin selling some of your stories. In fact, the many of the religious organizations have magazines that you can also write for.
Oh,
Anywhere from children's stories through adult information. So
so
you have to sort of ferret those out from buying magazines like Writer's Digest and Writer, and you have to consult the magazines. Many of those are available at libraries, so you don't have to subscribe.
and what age do you need to be to write in these?
Oh, any age. I don't think age keeps you from writing. In fact, that's one of the things that many people come to a senior center where I'm a member. They'll have writing classes where you can. I suggest journaling, for instance, even for any age person. If you want to start writing, start jotting down little pieces of writing in a book and polishing them, so to speak, writing and rewriting. That's another thing that sometimes becomes difficult for us. It's sometimes hard to take that someone says, well, your piece needs to be rewritten. And that means generally that it's not smooth flowing. And so sometimes you do have to rewrite publications or something for a publication to make it more coherent.
So, Frances, what has writing taught you about yourself?
To be patient, I think. To persevere. Here again, where I'm saying you have to write and rewrite. Destiny's Daughter, my book. As I mentioned, it started out years ago as a middle grade a book, and now through the years I have rewritten it 2 or 3 times so that now it's more a woman's interest. But that's how things just will evolve.
And you talk about perseverance. I can't.
Perseverance.
My tongue. I don't know what's going on with me.
Resilience is maybe a better word. But so many people, particularly coming out of COVID, and people keep saying that, the light at the end of the tunnel and so forth. It has been. And so many people have had to persevere and continue on. Don't give up. And so that sort of has become my byword. Keep chugging along.
I like that. Keep chucking along. And we need to do that, right? Is just keep chucking along. I want to get into some of the questions that I've asked you, and I asked all the guests. I asked you for one word to describe yourself, and you gave me the word preserve as a word that describes you as an individual. Why that word?
Well, I guess that's because you have to keep the same thing I just said. You have to keep reinventing yourself, so to speak. If one job doesn't work out for you, you can't just dwell on the fact that oh me. You really have to sort of restructure or reevaluate your skills and carry on the best you can. You can't just give up.
And I asked you what your favorite color was, and you gave me soft blue.
Soft blue, I think. Yes. I don't know. That reminds me of the sky, and for some reason, I just love blue.
So does blue calm you? Is it a calming color?
I think yes. I think it's very calming, and many of the items of clothing that I pick will have blue in it, and that type of thing. So I think that's my favorite color.
So now I want to ask you, Frances, if I ask you what is your T, what 3 words would you give me today?
Oh, you mentioned to me teaching and education. I really discovered teaching sort of later in life there because I had already been downsized from the Hot Dog Council. That was just a period in time when downsizing was sort of customary in public relations, particularly with companies. And I was downsized by both Hot Dog Council and Allied Signal, great companies. But and then I had a chance to start teaching. So my teaching came later in life, and I found maybe that was something I should have been doing much earlier. And let's see, TEA. What I don't know. I can't remember what the last one might be, but I'm sure it's associated with the teaching and continuing to learn.
So the awareness of learning.
Yes, putting this book together as with the students has been a great experience, and I'm learning many things now that I wished I had learned with the other books that I had written. But it's of course a completely different audience.
So, Frances, are you still teaching in the colleges?
No, I retired about 10 years ago. And yes and no. I just really retired from teaching online with North Central Arizona, but I was teaching many foreign students and military people. And teaching online, you have to be there 24 hours a day because you're teaching adults from around the world. So no, I sort of gave all that up. And now and then I do give a sort of 1 and 2 day type workshops, but mostly now with writers groups.
So I have another question here for you. Why the name Destiny's Daughter for your book?
A good question, and I should have done one thing that they tell writers to do is to look up if there are other books written with that title. Well, I did not do that. I started out years ago saying, calling the book Dr. Mary for youngsters. And then I gave it another name, and I was using completely different dialogue and so forth. And as time went on, she began to seem like she was in the right place at the right time, and sort of a destiny type thing. And I thought, well, that works well, and that's why I kept the name, only to discover that, of course, there are other Destiny's Daughters that are on other topics.
Yeah, I found that when I did some research. I was like, whoa, there's a couple of them out there.
And that apparently Destiny is a very popular name right now. When you Google it under what is called Google Alert, you'll find that many people have named their children Destiny. And so you really learn a lot of things about other destinies.
Absolutely. Yeah, because when I went and did some research on Destiny's Daughter, I was like, oh, there's other books. Oh, okay. And then I'm like, did she write these ones too? And I'm like, oh, no, they're different ones. So
that's another tip if anyone's thinking about naming their book. Be careful there, and maybe in fact, there's whole classes on going to what kind of cover you should use and which direction your name should take, and there's all kinds of classes and Zoom programs that they'll direct you in different directions on all of these topics. And YouTube, just put your topic in, and you'll find someone discussing it.
Well, that's a good tip. I never really thought of doing that. I do that with music, but I never thought of doing that with books.
Everything.
So how long did it take you to write the Destiny's Daughter book?
Well, I would say I've been working on this one about over 20 years, because I was from the first time I thought about it. Fortunately, and maybe coincidentally, I kept moving to places where her name would pop up. I was near Syracuse University when I was traveling one time, and I discovered that they had that was her archive. And I called them, and they invited me to come over, the ladies in the library. And they said, we have these 3 or 4 cardboard boxes here that you can dig through and, find information about her. I didn't have that kind of time. They did copy off many articles for me. I took them home with me. And then also when I moved to teach for Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, I found that was where she had been imprisoned. And so that had quite a bit of history that I could absorb. And one thing that's very popular now with everyone that's writing historical type fiction, they suggest that you go to a place where that person has been and sort of begin to absorb some of the atmosphere that that person might have absorbed. For instance, I've heard other authors talk about um, going to, well, Booth is a book where the author came to the Baltimore area and visited the childhood home of Booth that assassinated the President Lincoln, and she absorbed everything. Trying to get in the feeling of how that family might have felt. Other museums now are also offering you the opportunity to go to their study and sit in a chair and maybe absorb some of the history of the person that was raised there.
Oh wow. So did you do that, Francis?
Well, I walked up and down some stones. They still have, by the way, a lot of stony alleys and things like that there, and of course, some buildings, and out into the at Warren, wait a minute, the Fredericksburg area. They have several sites on the the battlefield fields where you can go and visit some type of a building, and there you can get gather up some of the same feeling. You have to have a lot of imagination to do that, though. To be able to transfer it sort of into your book or whatever you're writing.
So what age genre is this book for?
Well, I would say that you could go anywhere from about 14 to 75, 80. Depends on, how historical minded you might be. And history right now, they say, that the book people tell you that history is more women are reading about history, particularly women's history, because we seem to have become encouraged to find out how the women of the past may have approached some of the same problems that we're now having.
Do you see any change in any of the issues that maybe Dr. Mary brought to the table still today?
Well, I listen to one thing that I did what I found interesting was that a couple of years ago, when two or three of the younger senators, young women, came into the Congress, they immediately spoke back. I mean, they responded with answers very quickly, and they have now, it seemed, learned to maybe bite your tongue now and then, and think about how you're going to respond. So I think that's maybe one of the best hints that I took from her was maybe study up on what you're going to say. Also, something else that I've been writing about for the teachers magazine was that conversation seems to be fading away. We don't have the opportunities now, many times, to have a back and forth debate or conversation with people. And so I'm trying to think of ways that you can approach other people to have a longer discussion. Everything really can't be by email.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point that you bring up, because a lot of podcasts out there, they're really quick, right? They're like 15, 20 minutes. And some people take that 15, 20 minutes just to break the ice and just to get into the conversation.
Yes, there is. I'm trying to think of what his name is. There is a premier debater. I think his name is Sao or something like that. I'm sorry that I'm mispronouncing his name. Right now, he's sort of campaigning for the same thing. He feels that more people should enter into debating, and then you would learn how to converse back and forth, and feel more comfortable doing it. So at least that was one thing that I picked up from the from my studies.
Well, and that's something it seems to be disappearing too, is debate. A lot of people are just agreeing with everything. We're not having that honest conversation of debate. A lot of people are just like, yep, 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 it's okay.
Yes, that's his point. That's his point.
Yeah.
And so maybe we should be. And also, I feel too that many people now. You may have someone ask you, "How do you start writing?" Um, I suggest to people at any age, even children, start writing something daily in a journal. A lot of people, they get my age and they think, "Oh, I'd like to tell my family about some aunt or uncle or something like that," and they don't know exactly how to approach writing about it. But one way is to sit down and pretend you're writing a letter and just journal and write short pieces. And sometimes those short pieces, if they're talking about a relative, you can take those and give them as a Christmas gift or a birthday gift, talking about some distant relative. And that's a nice gift to leave with other people in your family.
Well, and that's something we also lost, right? Is writing letters, writing to pen pals, getting to, the communication has really decreased a lot.
Yes,
Everything is so
yes,
short form and everyone is breaking things up, where you could have a conversation of two paragraphs. A lot of people are just doing it in 2 words now. And I'm just like, whoa, that's a little bit too fast for me. I need that I need a slow cup of tea, you know?
yes, absolutely. I agree. Absolutely. I've noticed that email now, and maybe it's Twitter. One of the things, one of the social media, that they down at the bottom of your letter they put "thank you" or "got it," so that you'll respond, and just saying "got it" uh, is really a short response.
Yeah, well, they have like these pre statements that you can use, right? Instead of you even typing now,
Right.
they
Yes,
tell you what to say, and you're
yes.
like, okay, well, maybe I don't want to say that.
Well, maybe you want to say something that sounds more familiar,
Well, more personalized. I like personalizing everything. Like all of my emails, I don't like cold calling. Like anybody that cold calls Miss Liz, your email is automatically going in the garbage. Make it personal. Take the time to actually reach out. I know that we're all busy and life is hard sometimes, but that personal touch does go a long way. Um, so I want to get into you. You mentioned that Dr. Mary's was in prison.
Yes, for 4 months, she was. She was. Well, another reason that I called her somewhat of a maverick was that she gained the uh, approval from these different generals that she was working for. She was down on the Georgia border, and they outfitted her with a wagon and a couple of guys to go along with her. And she would not only treat the military people that had been wounded, but disease was very bad among the soldiers and among the country people that lived in those areas. So she would go out and deliver babies or uh, help someone that had maybe typhoid or chicken pox or something like that. Anyway, she was wandering along. She was also relieved in using herbs as poultices and mustard plaster and things like that. And so she was wandering along through the woods and was captured by the Confederate soldiers. She thought she could talk her way out, of it, but she couldn't. They carried her off as sort of a trophy to Richmond, Virginia, where Castle Thunder was the nickname of the prison there. She was incarcerated there for 4 months, and which was a very strenuous circumstances. There were other women prisoners there also, and the meals were meager. She tried to get them to serve more vegetables. I think she was a pain in her neck, talking back all the time. But anyway, 4 months later, she was released and went back to Washington D.C. One thing that she did was she didn't live steadily in Washington D.C. She either rented a house or an apartment or a hotel, and then would take the train back and forth between Washington and Oswego, New York. And those train rides, hundreds of them, must have been terrible because I've read that the seating accommodations were like sitting on wooden crates.
Oh,
So, that was not, of course, that's all they had at the time if you were going to take a train. But most of her time, she traveled by either walking because she didn't want to spend the money on travel, walking or using a wagon, driving a wagon, uh, or what was I about to say? Taking these long trips. Of course, she would use the train. Another point that is brought out in several histories, just as sort of a side note, she was very, very well accepted by most of the soldiers, and they suggested that she was venturing out there so much, walking around and everything by herself, that she'd get a gun. So they outfitted her and taught her how to use a gun, a revolver type of pistol, and she bought a brace of these. But she had to own those at the time that she was captured, but she was carrying them in her pouch, so she wasn't able to pull out her gun and defend herself. But I will say, overall, she was quite a character from childhood on. I mean, always being very independent, and at least that's what her own book. I'm not imagining these things. I got that feeling by reading her own book, Hit, which they still sell, by the way, and gaining a lot of firsthand information. And since the book is in the public domain, you can, of course, copy and put into my book many of her sayings.
well, that's cool that her book is still available.
Yes, from Amazon. I don't know who gets the royalties on it after 156 years. But anyway, and there's another couple of other companies that have reprinted it.
So, did you find any family members that were still alive?
No, I didn't really go that far because I think I don't know that. Yes, they mentioned them. They mentioned other people that knew neighbors in the Oswego area, that type of thing. I have talked to the historians and at the Historical Society there, but no, not anyone firsthand. Well, of course, after 156 years, much of their material would be like sort of what I have found. Oh, and that's another thing I do want to mention to anyone that's trying to do anything historical. I spoke of going to the Syracuse University and digging through the cardboard boxes. Now all of that is digitalized.
Oh,
So you can sit at home in your comfortable chair and access. Well, I'll use them for an example. They have tons of all of that material, thanks to volunteers probably, who have now put that on tape. So you ask permission and sort of sign in and become a member of the family there, and you can go access all kinds of bank books and stories and all that type of thing.
so what has changed so much that you're like blown away with journalism?
The digitalized, I think, is that so many things, particularly if you're talking about history. I did a story about 2 years ago about someone that was using a grist mill, and would you believe, I Googled it, and there they told me how there was a sample of George Washington's grist mill, a restoration, and you could actually see how it operated. I mean, so sometimes you're not able to go to a place to an article. There's a piece of information about it somewhere in the computerized world that you can call up and learn everything you wanted to know about it.
So, Francis, out of all of the articles that you've written in your lifetime, do you have a favorite?
Well, I have some favorites, but one of my most interesting was back in my newspaper days. With the Sun Times, I wrote an article about the Interior Decorators Club had gone to a mansion and had restored its in each room. They had redecorated it, and that was, of course, a charity tour, that type of thing. And in my article, I kept referring to the owner as deceased, or called him the late John Smith. And would you believe that after it printed and came out, the man called me up and said, "I am the late John Smith," that he was not deceased. And I was very apologetic about that. So, I that taught me a great lesson, was to pay attention, to not be so careless. And that's one of my better stories on that. And the fact that sometimes writing will put you accidentally in contact with someone who really is a celebrity, or a movie star or whatever. And I found some of those stories to be very interesting. I met Barbara Egan, who Genie in the Bottle, and had good conversation with her, and found that many of these people were people just like you and I, and you can have a good conversation with them.
I like that you said that, because I say that all the time, right? Celebrities are people too. They're individuals. People seem to forget that they're just like us. It's a job title that they're, and they make a lot of sacrifices, and I think we seem to forget that.
Yes, yes.
And
the one thing too is, you don't want to have your autograph book. I don't think I have any autographs from anyone that I really talked with or reviewed their play. Often when you're out in the Heatherlands, you can they'll do a play. There'll be a celebrity come in and do a play or something, and you'll be able to talk with them. And I never felt comfortable jerking out something for an autograph. So I don't have any autographs.
I used to have an autograph book when I was 13 years old that I was running around, and I think I got like 4 autographs when I was at Canada's Wonderland from Days of Our Lives superstars.
Oh,
They were there. And I had the biggest crush on Bo Brady. And then as I got older, I was like, why did I even like that guy?
Yes, yes. And now between the people, if I had their autograph, my granddaughters wouldn't even know who I was talking about.
But I think that's how we keep the stories alive, is by sharing them, right? And putting them out there. And like you said, writing a letter, you just never know what story you can write, a history letter and that. So Francis, I want to get into, you received an award here for business leadership. So I want to speak a little bit about that. Our hour is running by really quick this morning. And then I want to get into what you're doing with the seniors and technology before we wrap up.
Well, that was long ago, and that was with the Hot Dog Council, and I was working with different groups at that time. And actually through the Public Relations Group of America, I was a member. They would send you out to do some pro bono type services. You'd work with a nonprofit group to help them get started, and that basically is teaching them how to send out press releases and just get going. And after that, it accumulated over a few years. I was nominated for that particular YWCA award, and was able to go out to California to their I was living in Chicago, to their annual meeting and receive an award and that type of thing. It was just an accumulation of activities, and they give you a statue or a little, like an Emmy or a whatever. You get one of those.
A little Oscar.
You get a trophy of some type, which I still have the pieces of it because it was too tall and I had it broken too and so forth. But anyway, it's a nice memory. And what was the other one you asked me?
About the seniors club. You're doing something.
Well, I now that I don't have a car anymore. I sold my car and don't drive, but I do still continue to work with senior organizations and teaching writing classes. Here again, I promote journaling. Sometimes they want to have a class, but I also belong to a couple of the journaling, senior journaling classes that are on Zoom, where you do prompt writing. Many of the people here again, they don't want to write a book or even a magazine article. They'd like to just write down a few memories, and so we do prompt writing where we use pictures or words or different kinds of conversation to promote spontaneous writing. And you write, 100 words, 150 words, and you share them. And I think that's very therapeutic. And in fact, in recent years, the aging, the people up above, the departments of aging, have tried to encourage more of these writing classes, just for the very reason that sometimes you're feeling down or depressed or something, and maybe just writing a little something will get you back on track again. So at this point in my life, I promote really seniors doing more writing, not particularly for anybody, but just to be writing.
So, any final words you have for the listening audience or the audience that will listen to the replay?
I've been chattering on here about a number of different topics. Really, I encourage people that if they think they would like to write, just sit down and start writing. It's sort of a grueling business to find, but join a group and start. You'll find the people more interesting than they will give you more satisfaction than the writing itself. You may never win awards or whatever, but you'll create good friendships, I think.
And where can people find your books?
Oh, it's being published by Apprentice House Press, also Barnes and Noble, Amazon. This is my first book that really is being published by a real publisher. Not the other books are of course on Amazon. That's a whole nother chapter. Producing your own books through Create Space, doing it yourself. But this is really by a real publisher. Miracle, sort of capping my journalistic career.
Well, I want to really thank you, Frances, for joining me this morning and having tea with me. If anybody would like to have you on their podcast, how can they reach you?
Well, just email me, fealtman@yahoo.com, and I'll respond back to you.
Well, thank you so much. It was a real honor having you this morning with me.
It's been an honor meeting you too.
Yeah, and we had a good journey leading up to this tea time, because I like to make my guests really welcome. So if they have like any issues or technology or stuff like that, I go out of my way and I'm like, oh yeah, let's jump on it quick. And I got to meet Frances before today's tea time, so I want to thank you, Frances, for reaching out and asking me for that help, because I really appreciate that. And I want to give a special shout out to Radio Guest for giving me the opportunity to sit and have tea with you, Frances, because
Thank you.
through Radio Guest is one of the locations that I get some of my guests. So I really want to give a good shout out to Radio Guest. And I want to let everyone know that you can subscribe to the Miss Liz's YouTube channel to hear all of these amazing tea times. And you can share them at any time. You can listen to them at any time. And if you ring that bell, you'll get notified every time Miss Liz is live with a new tea time. So I will be back this afternoon at 3 p.m. and then again tonight at 7 p.m. So this afternoon, we'll be speaking with Linda Faye Smith, and she'll be sharing about special education and her new book that was just released, I think, a day ago. So we'll be talking about that newbie that's out. And then I'll be talking with Claudia Brown, who's coming in with holistic healing, and she'll be talking about healing from within. So we have some really incredible topics. So again, I want to thank you, Frances, for joining me. And I want to thank you, all the supporters and all the questions that come in. And make sure, if you'd like to know more about Miss Liz, check out the website at www.misslizsteatimes.com. And if you'd like to know more, check out the link tree. It's all there. And I'm going to wish everyone a good morning and good afternoon and good evening, wherever you're tuning in. And I will see everybody back at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today for the second tea time. And Frances, don't leave. I'm just going to wrap up the live.
Thank you.
And again, thank you so much.